Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Football Awards Show podcast extravaganza spectacular of 2024, reviewing the year of 2023. It might be a working title, but I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF. And with the end of week 17 also being the conclusion of fantasy football leagues for most people, it's time to embrace the offseason. And the best way to start that off is with some season in review type content, beginning with doling out some awards to our deserving fantasy players who hopefully helped us bring home an award of our own, the most important award of them all, a fantasy football championship. And with it being award season, we get an added award for you, the listeners, because joining me to help decide on the most deserving players for each award, the person who helped me preview every week of the regular season to get you good folks ready for those fantasy football battles, the legendary Kate Magdziuk is back. Kate, Happy New Year, and I hope your season finished strong. How you doing?
I'm doing good. We're looking back on a very memorable season here. We had a lot of injuries. We had a lot of breakouts. We had a lot of disappointments. We're going to highlight them all here for the listeners and just kind of pack it all in. Everybody needs closure, win or loss. Let's take this season, put a bow on it, and before we head into what I'm sure will be a absolutely wild offseason.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The offseason's always fun. We'll have free agency and draft coverage and all that kind of stuff throughout the offseason. But yeah, now it's a nice time to, like you said, give closure on the season, put a bow on it, wrap it up. However you want to say it. It's a good time to do that. So yeah, we'll start with some awards. We got, I think, 8 awards to hand out. And then we'll have some runner-ups in there as well. And they're mostly positive awards. We do have one that skews slightly negative because it can't all be sunshine and rainbows. We know fantasy football doesn't work that way. So we'll get into it here in just a sec. But first, as always, I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, you've had to learn so many new skills to provide for your family, how to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for even the pickiest eater, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You can go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, let's get this show on the road, and we'll start with the big one, the fantasy MVP of 2023. And I know most award shows save the top award until last, but not us. We're switching it up here since there really shouldn't be much suspense for this one, as the winner is fairly obvious for the most part. But it's going to be the player who was the most consistent throughout the year, delivering high-end fantasy performances and providing the greatest points per game edge over his peers in 2023. At least that's how I described it. But Kate, we'll see if we have the same pick here. Who was your 2023 fantasy football MVP?
It's Christian. No, it's not. It's not Christian McCaffrey. It is running back Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams, who he wasn't just a league winner. We'll get into that. He's going to win multiple awards in this podcast, FYI. But this was a waiver wire hero. He started out the season playing behind Cam Akers, who was the presumed starter. Cam Akers struggled out of the gate, and boom, Kyren Williams locked up this starting spot. Now, I know Christian McCaffrey is obviously an MVP, right? But you look at A, the expectations, you look at B, the fact that you were able to get Kyren Williams on the waiver wire. You look at C, the production. He finished as the overall RB for the season, despite missing 4 games due to injury. In 12 games, 1,350 scrimmage yards, 15 touchdowns. Again, overall RB4, despite missing 4 games. That's total scoring, not fantasy points per game. His 90.2 rushing grade ranked 5th among running backs on the season. He finished top 10, averaging minimum 100 rush attempts, averaged 5 yards per carry, 3.3 yards after contact per attempt. One of the lowest stuff rates in that cohort, 26 explosive runs. Like, he averaged almost 20 fantasy points per game. And let me tell you, the tiebreaker here between Kyren Williams and my good friend Christian McCaffrey. Kyren Williams won you a fantasy championship, while Christian McCaffrey unfortunately suffered a McCaff injury and didn't get to play the whole game. So yeah, I'm going to go with Kyren Williams, whose performance not just got me through the season, didn't just save my season, because hello, I could have had both Kyren Williams and Christian McCaffrey on my roster if I played my cards right. But I also like I can't ignore the fact that when I needed him most, he was there.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great call. Kyren Williams, like you said, he's definitely in the running for multiple awards this year. Just an amazing season. And so we're going to talk about him again here, but I do love the pick, especially him coming through in week 17, like you said, where McCaffrey did not. And I did put Christian McCaffrey as my MVP. I mean, consensus like top 3 pick this season by ADP heading into the year. Definitely delivered on the investment as well by scoring more fantasy points than any other player by a significant margin, over 20 more fantasy points than the next closest player, which was Josh Allen, a quarterback. Did appear in all 16 games this season, 24 and a half full PPR points per game, which was 3.2 more than the next closest running back, which was Kyren Williams, who was, like you said, just in 12 games this year. He also was elite. But yeah, not only did McCaffrey deliver on his high ADP, but he also led all scorers in full PPR for the year, delivered 21 total touchdowns on the season, had the second most total fantasy points from week 15 to 17 during the fantasy playoffs, despite leaving week 17 with a calf injury, like you said, or a McCaffrey injury. Brilliant. Love that. And then, yeah, no other player at any position held even more than a 1 PPR point per game advantage over the next closest scorer at their position. Well, McCaffrey did so by over 3 points per game and just over 122 PPR points more than the next closest running back as well. Just a massive gap there, with Travis Etienne being the RB2. So yeah, for me, whether it was full PPR, half PPR, non PPR, Christian McCaffrey was my 2023 fantasy MVP. But yeah, hard not to put Kyren Williams in there. He was absolutely on my runners up list, as well as CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, even Raheem Mostert, another one of those guys that didn't appear in the championship game, but all guys that I think are deserving. Who else did you have up on your runners up list? Was there anybody else other than McCaffrey?
No, McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, those are my top guys. Obviously, you have to talk about Tyreek Hill, but those are the obvious ones. I want to dig a little bit deeper. And speaking of deeper, this guy was as deep as you could get. Maybe not in the NFL draft. He wasn't that deep in the NFL draft, but boy, was he deep in the pre-draft rankings. I don't know of anybody that drafted this guy here that we're about to talk about for our rookie of the year. He was a hero. Let's talk about it. Rookie of the year.
Yes. Let's get into rookie of the year. So obviously, this is an award given to the first year player who performed above and beyond expectations of a rookie, delivering an MVP like performance in their own right. Definitely several worthy candidates here, but can only one can take home this specific award. So, Kate, your rookie of the year. I feel like I'll let you start with this one because you gave such a nice intro here for the player specifically. Go ahead.
In case I didn't give it away with that intro to the award, it has to be tight end Sam Laporta, who, just he was, like I said, not drafted really anywhere, but John, he was literally the most productive rookie tight end ever in fantasy football. This season was absolutely incredible. And I think, the Lions team in general was one that was kind of hard to suss out because there were so many different playmakers that you could go with. There were, obviously there was a lot of hype with Jahmyr Gibbs. There was a lot of hype with Amon St. Brown, Jameson Williams. What was he going to do, when he came back from his like what was this season going to look like in its entirety with the number of weapons? And I don't think anybody expected that a lot of that would run through rookie tight end Sam Laporta, who just literally put on a record-breaking rookie season at the tight end position. And man, if he does this as a rookie, what is to come? And how early do we have to draft him next year?
Yeah, it's exciting, right? Like this was, like you said, this rookie class, a lot of stars in here, that emerged right away in year one. But there's definitely something special about Laporta finishing as the overall PPR tight end one as a rookie, especially when the general consensus for rookie tight ends has been to avoid them in fantasy football because there's such a low success rate. They take longer to come along in the NFL. But now, I mean, whenever the fantasy community is going to cite a reason to ignore that narrative, Sam Laporta is 100% going to be at the top of reasons as to why you should. And he's definitely deserving of Rookie of the Year. He's my pick as well. I mean, finished with 7 top 5 PPR and half PPR finishes in 2023, played every game as a rookie, immediately established himself as a fantasy option from week 1 as well. You mentioned him not getting drafted highly in a lot of drafts, and it's definitely true. But if you paid attention to PFF, we were on Sam Laporta. We love Sam Laporta. I know Nick Boterford wrote him up. We talked about him on the podcast. Wrote about Sam Laporta very early in his fit in the Detroit offense after the draft and how he could be a tight end or a relevant fantasy option right away in year one. But nobody expected this. This was a massive performance for Sam Laporta, and yeah, definitely deserving of the Rookie of the Year. So yeah, I am 100% with you on this one, and I was definitely tempted to go Puka Nacua, to go Jahmyr Gibbs, to go even CJ Stroud. I went back and forth with all these guys, but I mean, we talked about it. Sam Laporta finishing as tight end 1 as a rookie is just pretty legendary. So those were my other runners up. But anybody else that you had that deserves an honorable mention here?
No, I think those pretty much cover it. Maybe Tank Dell, who was one of my biggest surprises. Like it's kind of hard to downplay, especially what Tank Dell did in the context of not just fantasy football, but like real life on the field performance. I think there were so many signs that Tank Dell could be a very productive wide receiver at the next level. Obviously, one of the most productive wide receivers in his final 2 seasons at Houston in the NCAA. Like, this was not a question about whether or not he could produce. It was about whether or not he had the size to translate to the next level. He answered any and all questions. Like I want to call him the 2023 underdog rookie of the year. Is that fair?
I like it. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah, it was such a bummer to see him get hurt too, right? And he was somebody that I know, like we talked about on the podcast when we were talking sleepers and stuff like that, and articles and stuff. We really liked Tank Dell, and would have been nice to see him play the whole season. I think if he would have, there's definitely a chance that he'd be higher up on these nominees as well. But I like the call for underdog rookie of the year. That's a good one for sure. All right, let's go to the next award on the list, and it is the 2023 Waiver Wire Edition of the Year. So this is an award that'll be given to the player who was rostered in, I mean, really like far less than 50% of leagues at the start of the year, and then became one of the highly coveted pickups of the week when they emerged, and then sustained that value throughout the year. So definitely quite a few worthy candidates for this one as well, but I went with Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, it was a really small segment of the fantasy community that was in on the potential of Nacua before week 1. But I think even the most optimistic of the bunch would be lying if they told you that his rookie season that he had was in his range of outcomes. I mean, it started with a combined 33 targets over his first 2 games of the year. And I know that was with Cooper Kupp on injured reserve to start the season, but he stepped in, did an uncanny Cooper Kupp impression, dominated the Rams target share, posted some huge fantasy performances throughout those first 4 weeks. I think before waivers ran prior to week 2, he was rostered in just 2.3% of ESPN fantasy leagues until that number soared well beyond 50% and only climbed to before he was basically unavailable in all leagues in just a few short weeks. And then even when Cooper Kupp returned, Nacua continued his impressive rookie season, finished with 1,445 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, 101 receptions through 17 weeks, finished as the PPR wide receiver 7 in points per game and wide receiver 5 overall. This guy was a 2023 5th round pick out of BYU. immediately made himself a top dynasty target, elite 2023 fantasy asset all season long for those who were able to add him off waiver wires for the cost of nothing more than a mouse click, which we love to see. So yeah, Puka Nacua is my waiver wire ad of the year. How about you?
I love the pick. I think Puka Nacua is like the 1B to my 1A, who I already hinted, it's Kyron
Yeah.
Williams. I cannot deny what Kyron Williams did in terms of his steadiness as a producer. Obviously, Puka Nacua had a couple of up and down weeks, right? Still a league winner, of course, but Kyron Williams, the steadiness of that production when he was on the field, he was producing. So I gotta give my flowers to Kyron Williams for all of the same reasons that he is my fantasy MVP for the season. Like I said, Puka Nacua, my 1B to Kyron Williams is 1A. Also Sam Laporta, who again, for
Yep.
all the same reasons, he was a waiver wire ad who literally finished as the tight end one as a rookie. That is pretty hard to beat. And when you can find consistency at the tight end position, boy, that can win you an entire league in and of itself, especially even if you find like, a tight end, like a mid-range tight end one on the waiver wire, that's pretty clutch. You find the
Yep.
tight end one overall on the waiver wire, that is as clutch as it can get. But yeah, Kyron Williams for me, and then the runners up are so close here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I had Kyron Williams in my runners up as well, and I think I put the only thing I considered like as my tiebreaker because they were both like so close again was I think Williams was rostered in like 10% of leagues and Nakua was like 2%, so that was my only tiebreaker because I'm with you. Kyron Williams super valuable, and I'm definitely going to give him an award here very shortly. And then yeah, I had Sam Laporta in there. I think he was rostered in like 30% of ESPN leagues after week one or something like that. So just the fact that Nakua was way down there below 5%, I felt like that gave him the slight edge for me, but hard to argue with Kyron Williams, Sam Laporta. I mean, you even put Zach Moss as like an honorable mention as well. I thought that, when he played in place of Jonathan Taylor, got the workload and the usage that we had hoped for and some strong fantasy performances in there as well. But definitely wasn't a full year's worth of usage for Zach Moss, but still thought he was worth mentioning as well.
For sure.
All right, let's go to the 2023 Most Improved Player of the Year. So this is the award for a player that saw the biggest jump in value from last season to this season, delivering a high-end fantasy performance in 2023. This player will have likely increased their points per game total by a significant margin and overall positional finish just the same. So Kate, your most improved player of 2023, who you got?
I'm going to go with former second round pick tight end Trey McBride, who
Mm.
uh, maybe tapered off just a little bit at the end of the season, but still just so impressed with the growth that we saw on the field. And I do think that moving forward, he very well may be drafted as a top 6 tight end in 2024 fantasy leagues. Just such a strong performance. It really carved himself out a role as the leading receiver on this offense. Especially amid injuries to Marquise Brown, there weren't a ton of offensive weapons that this team had to, that opposing teams had to cover. It was kind of Trey McBride or bust at the end of things. And I mean, looking at, the way that he became a focal point in the offense, 2 games of 10 plus receptions. He had 5 or more receptions in half of his games this season. I just so impressed at 2.08 yards per route run, saw improvements in his yards after the catch per reception, saw a monstrous jump in his PFF receiving grade, had a 53.6 PFF receiving grade as a rookie, jumped up to 81.0 in his sophomore season. I think this is kind of only the beginning. Obviously, the team released, Zach Ertz, who aging tight end. Maybe we see him, revitalize his career in Philly. Who knows yet? But, I think this kind of signals a new era for the Cardinals in terms of their receiving core. You have Marquise Brown, who, correct me if I'm wrong, is on the final year of his deal. Like, Trey McBride might just be wide receiver 1 from here on out for this offense to the remainder of his rookie deal.
Yeah, I love the Trey McBride call. He's definitely in the running for me. Made my runners up list. And yeah, like you said, like that improvement from his rookie year, because he had his opportunities as a rookie too when Zach Ertz was out and just
Mhm.
wasn't like overly efficient, didn't have like a lot of promising underlying metrics or anything like that to make us believe in him for 2023. And man, he absolutely delivered in a big way when he got that opportunity again this year. So I'm with you. Trey McBride, a great call. And this is where I give my Kyron Williams award for most improved player here. I mean, like you said, he's got a case for many fantasy awards this season, but his jump in production, obviously from 2022, where he appeared in 8 games as a rookie, he managed just 3.8 PPR fantasy points per game, all the way to 21.3 this year is an improvement that nobody saw coming. And like you said, rarely drafted, rarely rostered heading into week 1. So there nobody really expected this big of a jump. And you look at obviously an increase in workload, but his production improved across the board as well. And that includes his efficiency rank. So you look at 2022. 3.8 points per game, like I said, was 67th among running backs. That jumped up to second among running backs. PPR points total, he only had 30 and a half PPR points in 2022. That I messed up the total there, but it was the fourth most total. And then yards per carry increased from 4 to 5. Yards after contact per attempt increased to a top 10 number here in 2023. His rushing grade increased from 74.8 to a 90.6, which was tied for third among running backs. I mean, again, deserving of being called waiver wire edition, fantasy MVP, playoffs MVP. There's no denying that. But in his incredible jump in production makes him my most improved player this season as well.
See,
So, yeah,
John, I'm gonna stop you right there. The fact that we're trying to nominate Kyron Williams as
yeah,
either a winner or runner up for all of the awards,
true.
I don't know. I feel like maybe that's indicative of, I don't know, a fantasy MVP.
That's a good call. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he qualifies for so many here, and I think he makes his runner up again in another award coming up. So there's absolutely the case to be made, just pure volume alone, that he has been a star across the board here. Yeah, I love the call for Kyron Williams as MVP as well. All right, let's take a quick ad break from our friends at DraftKings. NFL fans, it's time to unwrap nonstop football action this holiday season. Throw down on big matchups with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. This week, new customers can bet just $5 on the NFL and score 150 instantly in bonus bets. So, heading into week 18 here, we got a couple props that we like. And for me, I'm going to roll with the defensive props because it worked for us last week when we took CJ Mosley. So I'm going to go with another tackle prop, and that is EJ Speed of the Indianapolis Colts going over 8.5 total tackles at plus 105, going against the Houston Texans, who are a top 10 team in yielding tackles to opposing linebackers. EJ Speed has delivered at least 10 total tackles in 3 straight games, playing a near every down role at 90% plus of snaps each week since Shaq Leonard has been released as well. So EJ Speed over 8.5 total tackles for me against the Texans. Lock it up. How about you, Kate?
I'm actually sticking with the same game here. I'm gonna go with CJ
Nice.
Stroud over 268 and a half pass plus rush yards. Look, it was a little bit of a slow start for CJ Stroud out of the gate, returning from injury in week 17, but this is a must-win game. They win and they're in. And I do think that they're going to put this game in the hands of rookie CJ Stroud. I don't know how much of this is going to come by way of passing touchdowns, but we know that this Indianapolis Colts secondary can be suspect. And you know what? If he can't get it done on the ground, he is capable of getting it done with his legs. I just think this is, a moment to take advantage of. They are going to be on the road, of course, which hasn't always worked out for Stroud this season, but playing indoors in a must-win situation, I think the passing volume should be there, even if maybe he doesn't have the most efficient day on the road. Lock up CJ Stroud. Love him as a play this week.
Nice. Yeah, it's a great call. So yeah, download the DraftKings Sportsbook now with code PFF. New customers can bet $5 on NFL action to score 150 in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code PFF. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort. Licensee partner, Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, Louisiana. 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility and deposit restriction terms and responsible gaming resources. All right, let's go to the 2023 Fantasy Playoffs MVP. So this is, I mean, weeks 15 to 17 is what we're looking at. These are arguably the most important weeks of the season for fantasy managers. They are the most important weeks for fantasy managers, and a time when a small 3-week stretch can make or break an entire season. This award is given to the player who consistently delivered high-end fantasy performances for all 3 weeks of the fantasy playoffs and ended up being the primary reason for a championship being secured once all the smoke had settled. So, Kate, your fantasy playoff MVP.
All right, we got to talk about CeeDee Lamb, who
Yes.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to admit, I was in 3 championship games. I went against him in 2 of them. And guess what? He crushed me. He absolutely obliterated me through my fantasy championships. He won you that clutch game. But I mean, man, like CeeDee Lamb, 398 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns over the final 3 weeks, 26 receptions in that span. Just was so freaking dominant, like just in general, like on the field, but also translated for fantasy, which is even better. 3.4 yards per route run in that span. He was volume, he was efficiency, he was literally everything you could ask for, and he was upside. He won you your league single-handedly. If you had him on your roster, boy, were you lucky this year.
Yeah, I got the exact same player. It's got to be CeeDee Lamb. I mean, not only finished as the overall wide receiver 1 for fantasy this year, but he did so by saving his best performance of the year for last, which is just amazing. Started the fantasy playoffs with PPR wide receiver 16 finish. He followed that up with a wide receiver 9 finish in the semifinals before delivering a massive 40-plus point wide receiver 1 performance in week 17 to be the top fantasy scorer on championship weekend. Like you said, all the numbers for him across the board were elite. 37 targets over that 3-week span, which was second best among wide receivers. 26 receptions was the most. 398 receiving yards, the most. He had 2 touchdowns, and he had the most PPR points, the most half PPR points, and the most non-PPR points for wide receivers from week 15 to 17. And like you said, if you played him in week 17, you likely won your matchup. If you played against him in week 17, you likely lost your matchup. He was that dominant. So it's hard to argue. CeeDee Lamb is going to be the fantasy playoffs MVP for us. Did you have anybody that came close to taking this award from CeeDee Lamb for you?
Should we keep talking about Kyren Williams or?
Yeah, he's definitely in there.
See that I'm just saying.
I know.
I'm just saying, I have a feeling by the time we close out this podcast, you're going to be wondering why Christian McCaffrey was ever your pick in the first place.
Sure. That's a good call. Yeah. I mean, Kyren Williams, RB3, RB12, and RB1, the 3rd most fantasy points by a running back over the final 3 weeks of the season. Yeah, he was my next closest as well. I also included James Conner in there. James Conner had a really nice stretch there, RB11, and then back-to-back RB4 finishes, fourth most fantasy points by a running back over that span. And then David Njoku as well for tight ends. I mean, easily the most points by a tight end in that 3-week span. And he was tight end 2, tight end 4, tight end 2. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb just outscored them all. So yeah, hard not to go with CeeDee Lamb.
For sure.
All right. Next award is our 2023 waiver wire edition of the fantasy playoffs. So we talked about the waiver wire edition of the year. It gets a little tricky here in the fantasy playoffs because it's only a small stretch of games. So I went with Joe Flacco of the Cleveland Browns, and this one definitely more for deeper leagues because I don't think there was a lot of smaller to medium-sized leagues that were adding Joe Flacco, but in like super flex, in deeper leagues, even in dynasty, he was available. You added him to your roster because there's been so many injuries to the quarterback position. And I don't think you could have expected any more than what Joe Flacco was able to deliver during this final stretch of the season here, especially considering he was not even on an NFL team for the first 12 weeks of the season. His 5-game stretch with the Browns from weeks 13 to 17 was a legendary run in itself. But yeah, he started the year with a week 13 or in week 13 with a QB 13 finish. He never finished lower than that from that point on. He was QB 6, QB 8, QB 3, and then finally QB 4 in week 17. He was the only quarterback to throw for over 1,000 yards from weeks 15 to 17, and his 8 touchdown passes over that span tied for the best mark in the league as well. I think if you picked him up, you started him. His run not only helped fantasy managers who added him, but he's also on a 4-game winning streak in the NFL right now, which has helped the Cleveland Browns secure a playoff spot, which is truly legendary stuff from a 38-year-old Joe Flacco.
Yeah, did not have Joe Flacco coming off his couch to save the season of the Cleveland Browns on my bingo card for the year. But like all of the reasons you mentioned here, Joe Flacco is also my pick. I didn't even bother putting like a backup pick here because I just think it is Joe Flacco and that's about it. He was the overall QB5 throughout the fantasy playoffs, averaged 21 fantasy points per game. What I think is all the more impressive, he did that without a single scramble. A single scramble. Like, do you know how hard it is to do all like produce in that manner without supplementing it with any additional like plays on the ground? It's absolutely incredible. Of course, he's a statue in the pocket. He's an old man. Like I didn't expect him to do it, but I just did not expect him to post nearly 1,100 passing yards in that span. Just tied for a league high 9 big time throws in that span, tied with Justin Fields. Like didn't expect it, didn't have it on my bingo card, but he did help me win a fantasy championship. So Joe Flacco, I am a Steelers fan, sir. I hate to see you make the playoffs, but it is a real good story. And thank you for helping me manage a ship.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's well said. I think even more impressive too, like in week 17, doing it against the New York Jets defense was just like pretty remarkable stuff there on Thursday night. But yeah.
Can I tell you, I almost in my dynasty league, I almost had the gall to trade for I was trying to make all kinds of trades. I actually considered for a moment trading for Bailey Zappi so I didn't have to play Joe Flacco. And I didn't do it.
Ooh,
I played Joe Flacco, and I thanked my lucky stars that I did because I was terrified to start him against the Jets. But hey, that old revenge game narrative, who doesn't love a revenge game and a smoking hot 39-year-old elite passer? Like, come on. He's got this in the bag.
Yeah, it was an amazing performance. I put a couple honorable mentions, but nobody really came that close to beating Joe Flacco for me either. I put Zamir White, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. He finished as RB8 over that span. Tucker Kraft, tight end for the Green Bay Packers, was tight end 8. Demarcus Robinson of the Los Angeles Rams was wide receiver 12 over that span, but nobody performing to the level of Joe Flacco that you could add off the waiver wire in those final weeks. But let's go to another interesting one. I mean, you could argue that Joe Flacco could be the winner for this one as well, but just the 5-game stretch was what kept him out of it for me. But it is the 2023 Comeback Player of the Year. And for this one, I went just basically calling it a player who had a down 2022 season, seemingly lost fantasy value, and then regained that value with a pretty remarkable 2023. So, Kate, I'll be curious to see who was your 2023 Comeback Player of the Year.
So, okay, my brain has kind of been churning over this question because there are a lot of different ways that you can put it. I thought maybe Baker Mayfield because hello, Baker Mayfield is back in a big way, but I'll say Baker Mayfield never really had a ton of fantasy value. Like in dynasty leagues, in redraft, he was never really an asset that had a super high upside that made him a must roster kind of guy. So despite the fact that he was pretty productive, especially through like the middle, and he was a safe asset to kind of close out the year. Still didn't see as much of that upside. Then I thought Dak Prescott, and that was the answer that I put in the show doc. But the more that I've like just sat on this, I think it's probably got to be Brock Purdy. And
Nice.
just for the sake of injury, dude, it knocked out of the postseason, not, the 49ers knocked out of contention for what I think could have been a pretty exciting Super Bowl. We'll see if they manage to get it back there now with that first round bye. But Brock Purdy, I kind of thought like once he had that elbow injury, once he had the surgery, that might be the last we see of Brock Purdy. And no, he comes out. I know he isn't in the running for NFL MVP any longer, but I have to say he was one of the players that I was absolutely avoiding in fantasy leagues across the board. But 4 top 5 performances as a quarterback this year. We saw him get some legs on him. Like it wasn't much of a rusher in his rookie season. Um, Saw that bounce back in a huge way. He showed a lot of playmaking ability with his legs, was one of the most efficient passers in the year. I might need to switch my answer to Brock Purdy.
Okay. I like it. I mean, Brock Purdy was amazing this year. Like he was definitely one of those sleeper guys that we could have targeted late in drafts, and you'd definitely be very happy with what he was able to do because he actually led all quarterbacks in fantasy points over expected by a huge margin. He had 80 fantasy points more than expected, where the next closest was Josh Allen with 32. So near 50-point advantage there as far as over expected. So just, again, just surpassing expectations as Mr. Irrelevant and leading the 49ers here to a playoff spot and the #1 seed. And yeah, really nice season for Brock Purdy. I do like that call. I did go with the player that you mentioned in your list here and that you had in there was I went with Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, he tied for the league lead in interceptions last season with 15, right? He finished the year as fantasy football's QB 18. A lot of people were down on him heading into the year. He was often drafted outside the top 10 fantasy quarterbacks, according to ADP. He had previously finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 4 of the 5 prior seasons, including QB2 in 2019. But that 2022 season was admittedly a disappointment, right? And this season definitely got back to his productive ways after it was a relatively slow start. But from week 6 on, he caught fire, posting 6 top 5 fantasy finishes over that span, ultimately finishing as the QB4 overall, despite limited rushing upside as well and interceptions from last season. I think, there was reason to be optimistic for Prescott heading into 2023, including guys like CeeDee Lamb being one of, being his top wide receiver, which was definitely a big reason to believe in him bouncing back this year and being a potential dark horse QB1 candidate, which I did write that article and got a lot of crap for including Dak Prescott into that one. So I do want to use this as like a mini victory lap opportunity here for believing in Dak Prescott. But I mean, really just cut his interception total in half this year, basically throwing for the most touchdowns on the year. 4th most passing yards on the year, 2nd best passing grade, 2nd best overall grade for quarterbacks, 5th best fantasy points per game as well. All of that stuff was outside of a lot of the times of the top 20 in 2022. So loved what Dak Prescott did. He's my 2023 comeback player of the year.
Very fair, very fair. Honestly, I think the last minute kind of hesitancy there for me, leaning toward Brock Purdy, really comes from the injury and the fact that like
Yeah.
my expectations for him coming back from that injury were so low. But from a numbers perspective, like obviously Brock Purdy was efficient. That wasn't
Oh yeah.
necessarily a statistical comeback for Brock Purdy. It was more of the emotional and physical comeback from injury that maybe got him that award for me. But boy, oh boy, there are several good candidates for this award this year.
Yeah, for sure. I included Keenan Allen as a potential runner up here, right? He was wide receiver 37 in just 10 games in 2022, and then was wide receiver 6 through 13 games this year, which was wide receiver 3 in points per game. I did put Baker Mayfield in there as well, but like you said, what he was, coming back to was more that QB2 range, but he was QB 29 in 2022, played for two different teams over that span as well, finished as QB 17 this year. And then the other one that I put that I don't think a lot of people would think about is DJ Moore, because he was wide receiver 25 in 2022 and he played in all 17 games. It's like wide receiver 29, 25, not bad, but playing in all 17 games for a player like DJ Moore, you'd expect him to be a bit higher, and then goes to a new team this year, becomes wide receiver 8, and set a new career high in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, receiving grade. And now he only needs 2 receptions this week to break a career high for receptions as well, all on a new team for the first time in his career as well. So I wanted to put DJ Moore as an honorable mention in there as well.
Totally fair.
Awesome. All right, let's go to the last award of the show. And this is where
the saddest award for last.
I know.
Jon.
I know. I don't know why I did it, but I guess I didn't want to like mix it in there amongst all the positive. It's just that we'll sneak it in here at the end, and it is our most disappointing player of the year, aka the "You Were the Chosen One" from Obi-Wan Kenobi being disappointed in Anakin Skywalker. Big Star Wars fan, Kate. I don't know why I made that my reference.
I'll say I'm more of a Harry Potter girl,
Okay.
so I'll let you have this one, but
okay.
Just know that reference was totally lost on me.
Sure.
But I appreciate it nonetheless.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, this was going to be basically the player that let us down, right? Disappointed us in the way that Anakin Skywalker disappointed Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of Revenge of the Sith. But we're not going to put not going to lean too heavily on injuries, right? Like you could say Nick Chubb, but that's not fair to him. But yeah, we're mostly going to focus on like average draft position. I think going to play a major part in this award, consistently just not living up to that investment. And that's ultimately what's going to decide who is most deserving of Obi-Wan Kenobi yelling at them on behalf of fantasy managers everywhere. So most disappointing player of 2023 for me has to be running back Austin Eckler of the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, he was 2022's RB1 in full and half PPR leagues. Unsurprisingly, drafted among the top 5 picks in most fantasy drafts this offseason, despite coming into the year as a 28-year-old running back, which probably should have been the biggest red flag of them all. But it didn't seem to affect him last year. It looked like the running back cliff finally kind of caught up to Eckler in a big way. He reached career lows in efficiency across the board this season. That led to a reduced workload, really poor investment on a return on investment for fantasy managers who drafted him this year. He did have like a short stretch from weeks 8 to 10 where he was able to deliver, the fantasy production that he was drafted for, but really short-lived. He finished outside of the top 20 PPR running backs in 8 of his 13 games this year, and then outside of the top 30 PPR running backs in half of those games. So that never happened for him last year. He never finished outside the top 30 PPR running backs, did it 4 times this year. He also missed 3 games earlier in the year. Just never looked like the 2022 running back that fantasy managers drafted him to be, and that ultimately became one of a few different fantasy disappointments this season, but he is, to me at least, arguably the greatest disappointment of them all, considering that fall from grace and the investment that fantasy managers put into him. How about you?
I think that from an investment standpoint, you're probably right. This might be more of an emotional pick for me. I'm going with Dameon Pierce, running back for the Houston Texans, who I was so high on coming into the season. And he gave us a lot of reasons to be very high on him coming into the season. After all, as a rookie, with 100 among running backs with 100 or more carries in 2022, Pierce ranked top 12 with an 84.8 rushing grade, averaged 3.28 yards after contact per attempt, led the league with a 28% missed forced tackle rate. And that was all when there were no other threats of offense on the field. Like, you knew the play was Dameon Pierce, and that was about it. Obviously coming into the season, there was also the addition of Devin Singletary, but this is a team that didn't even bother drafting a single running back. Like, I thought this was for sure after the efficiency that we saw, after the situational aspect of like this team not having drafted a running back. Like I thought for sure that this was Pierce's year. He ranked as the overall RB 54 in fantasy points per game, averages 5.6 fantasy points per game in half PPR formats. Among running backs with 100 or more rushing attempts, had a 64.9 PFF rushing grade. That was the fourth lowest in that cohort, ranked dead last in fantasy points per touch, just 0.49 fantasy points per touch in that span, averaged 2.9 yards per carry. Like he wasn't fully healthy this season, but based on the expectations he set for me with his efficiency in, yards after contact and ability to, withstand contact, like all of those metrics had me very excited for what could be, an improved offense in 2023. And it was an improved offense, just no thanks to Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, this was definitely a bummer. Lost his job as well, like you said, to Devin Singletary, which there was gonna be the opportunity for him, and I think too, like just around the guys that he was drafted close to or even ahead of, right? Like in a lot of drafts, going ahead of guys like Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor fell in drafts a little bit, but James Conner as well in that range. James Cook, guys that really outperformed expectations this season. He ended up being a massive disappointment as well. So definitely fine putting Dameon Pierce in there because he did let us down for sure. There were a lot of guys that let us down, right? And Pierce being one of them. I also included as an honorable mention Patrick Mahomes, who like finished as QB7, right? Which isn't bad, but
compared to draft value though. You probably drafted him in the first or second round.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he was easily one of the top 3 fantasy quarterbacks drafted as well, with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. And then you look where Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen finished this year, 1 and 2. Again, disappointing from Patrick Mahomes, especially that final stretch of the year where just failed to really deliver some big fantasy performances when it mattered. Kyle Pitts, I put in there. I mean, again, a lot of people were expecting the disappointment for Kyle Pitts, but tight end 14, really kind of disappointing there. And then some of the bigger ones that you'd expect a nicer year from, for me at least, Jahan Dotson, who I thought was going to be in for a breakout year this year. He finished as wide receiver 54. And then Jerry Jeudy, really, really disappointing. I'm not somebody that necessarily I was like overly high on, but I just really didn't do anything. He was wide receiver 53, appeared in more than enough games to deliver, but literally did nothing. So those were some of my honorable mentions there.
I agree with all of them across the board. Man, it sucks to close out the show on a bad note. Is there any positive note that you want to shout out here before we close out the show, just to uplift our spirits a little bit? We don't want to end low on a positive note. So one of my favorite ways to close out the fantasy season, if a player helped you win a fantasy championship, consider donating to their favorite charity or their foundation to help support them and give them a show of thanks. Maybe you donate a little portion of your fantasy winnings to help honor those who did help you earn that bag, earn that trophy here in the fantasy playoffs. Just something to end it on a high note.
Nice. I like that. That's a great call. Definitely something that we could be looking to do. And being a little bit charitable, especially around the holiday season as well. And considering these players are the ones that helped us win that money as well. It's always nice to give back a little bit. So don't think it's going to get more positive of a note than that. So great call, Kate. But that is going to do it for our Fantasy Football Awards of 2023. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Feel free to let us know who your picks are for these awards in the YouTube comments or on Twitter or something. Mail a letter to my house if you like. Let's talk about it. But hopefully you enjoyed that, because since the fantasy season is over, this is kind of where we'll turn our focus to for the next couple of weeks or so. Just some season in review type stuff as we wind down here for the year and head into dynasty season and rookie talk post Super Bowl and free agent talk and all that stuff that we'll get to eventually. But Kate, thank you so much for joining me once again to hand out these awards. And then yeah, always a pleasure. Please let people know where they can find more of you and your work as well.
Yeah, give me a follow on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. That's Kate Magdziuk. Feel free to rewind that a few times over in case you missed the spelling the first time. But yeah, over on PFF, dropping on Friday. I've got fantasy lessons we learned. Also earlier this week, the 3 biggest disappointments and 3 biggest surprises here in the 2023 fantasy football season. So be sure to check that out.
Nice. Yes, definitely check that out. And then as for me, I'll still be writing up fantasy related articles on pff.com all off season long. So be sure to stay tuned as we kind of embrace the off season here. So thank you all again for a great year. And until next time, peace out.